Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here on WVU Sports Now. Mike Asti, and I will be joined by Cody Nespor. And the expectations are very, very low for Rich Rodriguez and the West Virginia football program for his first season back in 2025. Those are now starting to roll out here. It is that month. They're way, way too early, but they are very, very low right now. So despite all of the work he's been putting in and how confident he really is, and I talked to him even at the Coach's Caravan in Pittsburgh, he is really, really confident. Nobody nationally thinks anything of this program. Maybe they're better off being the underdog, though, and flying under the radar. It did work in the past. We will see if it will work again. And also the baseball program on the verge of doing that typical West Virginia sports thing where they choke something away. Seemed like the conference title at minimum was locked up, maybe even a chance to host a regional, which hasn't happened the last couple of years, despite how great those seasons were. And a rough week or so has dropped West Virginia significantly in the polls. They are still within that top 16 barely in D1, which is what everyone wants to focus in on. And looks like the conference title should still be theirs unless they really continue their choke job for their final weekend of the regular season. So, Cody, Rich Rodriguez, and we were going to start with the football program, of course, and then wrap things up with some baseball talk, has been really, really confident. And we talked even when he got hired that you got to be fair to the guy. It is year one, even though it's a new era and you can do a lot in the portal and coaches have won right away. But then he started dropping comments of winning a national title. He did it to McAfee. He did it again even a week ago on a national show. He reiterated again to me personally outside of a bar in Pittsburgh that is his goal. He wants to achieve that. It doesn't have to be year one, but if that's not done in the 5-year contract, he will not be happy. Big 12 title at minimum. He even said year one to evaluate the season as quote unquote good, you have to at least be in contention for a Big 12 title in November. He went that literal with it even for year one. And then nationally, everyone's kind of making fun of him and saying that that's just crazy. The over-under win total odds are 5.5, 5 for some sports books. People are saying that this Rich Rod style of I'll bring you in, I'll evaluate you, and a week later I'll tell you that I'm going to cut you, and then 50 players in and out in a few months based on the transfer portal from winter to spring doesn't work in this era, and the old school mentality for him is going to sink Rich Rod. Now that some dust has settled and you're seeing the national projections and how down everyone is nationally, these are some of the same people that thought the hire was a good one and were saying the hire was a good one when he was hired and announced in December. What are your thoughts on he's going to embark on a season where he has to prove the doubters wrong, which Rich Rod has done before, the program has done before, but it's also not worked as well?
Yeah, I mean, I to some degree, I think 5.5 over under is as good as you could hope for, right? Because I mean, there's not let's start. The most important position on a football team is quarterback. That's 2 question marks, right?
Yeah.
It's 3 if you want to throw Brown in there, but no sports book, no national outlet was going to call this a 7 or 8 win team. You don't know who the starting quarterback is or if they're going to be good. Yeah. You really, outside of Jaheim White, who should be the best player, you don't know who the skill positions are. We
barely saw him in the spring. Saw him in the spring. Yeah.
And then, who knows about the defense, right? And so it's, I don't know why someone would be surprised at 5.5 wins.
I don't think anyone's surprised, but it just corroborates what it seemed like some West Virginia fans were wondering was going to happen, because there were some people nationally, and certainly the fan base was getting excited on, okay, knew we were going to do an evaluation. We cut this player, but then we bring in this Power 4 transfer. Some of the transfer news has actually been positive in recent weeks. And some of the transfer addition rankings are not bad. They're in the top 40 in some of those rankings, but yet the people even higher up nationally are basically saying, yeah, we don't care. No, it's going to be bad. And so I think that's now happening. So now it's officially becoming an underdog story for the program. I don't think it's a surprise, but it's interesting how that's unraveled, because we even talked about, and I even still think in some of the national analysis of, okay, they're only going to win 4, 5, 6 games at the most. People are even saying, well, they had this mass exodus. We've talked about how that's just factually inaccurate, but all of that is now coming to a head. That, you know, how college football also works. It's not as big of a deal in this era because we have seen programs not ranked at all and end up in the playoff. We have seen year one coaches get a team in the playoff. The national rankings in the AP don't really matter in comparison to the CFP, but it will be a situation that they're going to enter week one, and it will be a long road to even get a ranking. And then you are behind the 8 ball in general. That is going to happen. And there are other programs that have a year one head coach or have going a overhaul a little bit that are getting more national respect than West Virginia.
Yeah. Well, and it's, sports books, and they set the line at what they think people will bet at.
Right.
Right. And so outside of West Virginia, and obviously we see this with these national outlets, outside of West Virginia, do people have a vast amount of confidence in the 2025 Mountaineers? Obviously not. Evidenced by the national outlets setting their line and the sports books saying 5.5 is what people will bet at in how the house will win money, right? Because that's what's most important.
Yeah.
So it's all and then it's the disconnect, which I think is interesting that you point out, is that this was lauded as the best hire last cycle by a lot of outlets. ESPN,
some of the same
CBS.
ones. Some of the same ones. CBS in particular, I believe, had it as an A+ hire, and that same outlet is saying that they're going to, barely be a bowl team.
So I think that does tell you, like, there's not a lot of confidence in this roster.
Right. Yeah, it's not it's not the coach, it's the roster. Yeah.
My snap assumption is if they had gotten a quarterback, a Power 4 transfer with starting experience, we would be looking at 6.5 or 7.5 win projection. But when it's a guy who was hurt last year, who is a part-time starter, and Nico, who's a part-time starter, not even really a part-time starter, just spot starter, and then a bad G5 guy, right? Like if JT Daniels was the transfer get this year, we would see like 7.5 as the line, right? 6.5, 7.5.
Which is what caused that season to be a year that it was really, really bad with him. But going into the season, there was national hype because, wow, you got a star as a Power 4 transfer. Didn't work out. But that guy, the JT Daniels, a Will Grier addition that we've seen the program get, didn't happen this year. It is more a little bit of a flyer on a Henderson with a lot of talent, but a year off. He looked really rusty in the spring. And the people that thought he would come in and be that guy and prove everybody wrong and be that I fit into the Rich Rod mold, like maybe a more muscular Pat White from 20 plus years ago, it clearly looks like it's probably going to be Nico as the starter. So your Power 4 transfer doesn't even end up winning the job as we stand now. And that's probably what people are thinking nationally. Okay, you did take a flyer on a Power 4 transfer. Other P4s did want him. That's a good ad. It's not a great ad, but then he doesn't win the job. Like, we all knew that JT Daniels was guaranteed the job when he was brought in the spring. Obviously, that was the case with Will Grier a decade ago, etc. That's not likely going to be the scenario for Henderson unless he blows you away in fall camp.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, I looked up last year Indiana, which is somewhat similar, right? Because Cignetti was the big hire, and it was like.
Yeah,
Indiana was projected to win 7 games.
That's what I mean. A little more.
Well, and I would say the difference, it has to be the roster and the guys he got in as transfers, and he brought a lot of his JMU team that were winners, right? Highly thought of.
Yeah, but not Power 4 transfers. That's what a lot of people evaluate on how many P4 transfers. His P4 transfer number was no different than Rich Rod. He just got a lot of JMU guys, so it appears that JMU roster got more respect than, say, Jacksonville State, that Rich Rod did win a conference title with at the Group of 5 level.
Well, it's not like there's relatively not that many Jacksonville State guys,
and
right? It's not
fair too.
It's not like what Cignetti did, which
100%.
wasn't a complete copy and paste job, but it was a lot. So I really think, what we're talking about, the projections and the betting line, over under line, really speaks to what you and I talked about last week. Is like, who knows about this roster, right? It's so hard to really project this roster, in part because we didn't see them all spring, right? If we had even like 2 or 3 or 4 times gotten to just watch, and then us as the beat writers could write about, like, hey, this guy looks good, or then that trickles out nationally, and then
or
people
put
have
out a
better
video.
feeling.
We got one, like, put out a video, they can watch it,
But,
right?
we're sitting here, don't know who the quarterback's going to be, don't know how either of them looked in the spring. I mean, really, don't know how the receivers looked, don't know how the defense looked. And so that's why I said, like, how could you hope for better than 5.5 when nobody knows anything about this team, right? It's almost, I don't want to say generous, because you don't ever expect teams to be terrible for the most part, but, like, based on the info, it's like, how could you project 6 or 7 or 8 wins confidently with the roster you don't know about and nobody's seen, and so, like, I don't know.
And the fans that are, because there are some fans who are, of course, mad, as they obviously always do when the national media is down on them. And there are fans, the second Rich Rod got hired, 7, 8 wins at minimum. They're betting on Rich Rod because he has a track record of success. Obviously, the Michigan tenure did not work out, and it's been a while since Power 4 success back at Arizona. But everywhere he's been, for the most part, has eventually won. What people are missing, it usually does take a year or so. He does not walk in the door and start winning, and that did not happen at West Virginia 20 years ago. But this is a different era. And he's even talked about the reason why he has basically literally said, to paraphrase, it's not about if I can go 3-8 or if I can do better than 2001 when my first tenure got started. I can't go 3-8. He basically is, without literally saying, been telling us, I've been told I'm not going to be able to go 3-8 and then go 5 wins and then go 7 wins and think I'm going to be hired and remain this coach in 4 or 5 years. It just can't happen. He'll be older. Ren Baker is probably going to move on at that point. Maybe he'll have to let him go. This is not going to be, you can suck for years on end and turn it around. They all know that the program needs to win, because I'm sure they know that if the fan base turns and stops donating, that will really kill them and they may never turn it around. But with all of that said, that's still the track record that Rich Rod is fighting for. So the people that are saying 7, 8 wins, even 10, etc., just wild projections out there, they are trying to bet a lot more on Rich Rod, maybe not even taking fully into account his history, and they're not looking fully at the roster, which we can't fairly analyze. The only thing to kind of play devil's advocate here that I think does stand out a little bit, that while you're saying 5.5, Circa actually has them at 5, but FanDuel has 5.5, which we wrote about. Well, that's just a fair, okay, I don't really know. I maybe want to respect the coach. There are some players here that we know. So 5.5. I'm not going to go 3, but 5.5. And that'll kind of go ahead and prove me wrong if need be. That might be kind of what the national media are saying. However, there are no other Big 12 programs with a worse over-under win total. There are some at the same. There are some at 5.5 in those sports books. There are others at 5. There's no one below. So they've decided, that sports books in general, not even the media, that this is the low bar for the conference, and we're just going to throw West Virginia there. There are other programs that we know for sure off a track record of the same coach, or just haven't been good for years on end, worse than West Virginia even the last several years, that have the same win-loss over-under bar. And maybe, to be fair as well, if you're going to go to the fair end to, it's a new overhaul, so we don't know, so here's the number. They're getting a similar win-loss record over-under to UCF, who is also bringing in their coach from their glory days and also kind of doing an overhaul, and question marks there on what they're going to be in year one of a second tenure. So that's kind of where all of this falls. But generally speaking, and this is the only thing that I think Rich Rod maybe can feel disrespected by, and maybe the fans can feel some disrespect, even though I did, articulate how it usually takes Rich Rod some time, but this is a different era, that usually if you don't know about a roster, Cody, but you think you'll get to a certain level because, okay, there's some talent there, and he did bring in a lot of new players, even though he lost some. A lot of them are Power 4 guys, 3, 4-star recruits. There has to be talent there. Everyone cannot just be all wrong on evaluating these players for years on end, which would be the case. Usually then maybe you can give a slight bump for the coach. Like, people have believed the last 6 years that even though there were different excuses that exist, the schedule was tougher, certainly more Power 4s in the schedule, that Neil Brown just was not a good enough coach to elevate. He did buck the trend in 2023, but certainly did not last year. And the belief, not only locally, not only with the fan base, but even nationally, Neil Brown, great guy, and be a group of 5 coach, great coach in general, maybe, but not good enough to win at an elevated level in the Power 4, and that he kind of held them back as well. And that a guy like Rich Rod, who's a borderline Hall of Fame coach, could buy you another win. We've certainly covered Brown and have seen certain times where a decision by Brown maybe could cost you a game or two. And going even further back to early in his tenure with the conservative nature of his play calling, that won't be the case with Rich Rod. He definitely will be aggressive. So it wouldn't be like, Brown cost them from 7-8 wins to it would have been 11 based on the roster. But there are people that argue that, okay, maybe you should have won 10 in the 2023 year, that Brown maybe cost you a win there, etc. So now you got Rich Rod in there. And he doesn't, even if he, obviously 2007 happened and he blew that game, and it's not like he's been perfect, but generally speaking, he doesn't, with decision-making, ruin you games, and he'll win or lose off the roster. It does not feel like he's getting a win-loss over under projection that is giving him any credit for giving you a win over Brown just on his own, that he can kind of formulate a win off his coaching. It feels like they're saying the roster's not good enough. Rich Rod, you're maybe a better coach, but it's not going to matter in year one. That, I think, is a little odd because you're figuring the coaching has improved. The staff has improved. There's more coaches. They're better coaches on resume. Certainly Zach Alley is. And these same national outlets said the staff is better than last year's staff. But the win-loss over under projections are getting to be the same as they were the last several years with Brown going into a year.
Yeah, and I was curious, I was wondering, does every Power 4 team just get, 5.5 win line? Purdue, new coach, terrible program. They're at 3.5. Northwestern was at 3.5.
Yeah, they won one last year, I think. Yeah.
Funnily enough, Pitt is at 5.5, same as West Virginia.
Yeah, same coach going on. I think it'll be year 10 for Narduzzi.
And then I wanted to look up North Carolina.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's hard to tell. Can you imagine predicting that? People are saying he might not even be the coach in week 1.
North Carolina's at 7.5, which seems like they're getting a Belichick bump. But
well, I guess that kind of leads into what I'm saying. They're giving a Belichick bump, but not a Rich Rod bump. How the roster is that different? Obviously, different conferences and a lot of drama around Belichick. But they're giving bumps for certain coaches, but not others. And a lot of people were singing the praises of the Rich Rod hire. It doesn't appear.
Yeah. So is it, from my point of view, does 5.5 feel low? Yes, it feels low. Does 5.5 feel unfair? I don't think so. Right? It almost feels like 5.5 is Rich Rod kind of getting some benefit of.
Okay.
we don't think this is a guy that's going to go 3-8.
So if Neil Brown was the coach of this roster, do you think it'd be like 4.5 or 3.5 and the worst in the country? Then is that what you're kind of saying?
Well, yeah, because I mean, they got picked dead last in the Big 12 in a year where they didn't have a bad roster.
Well, that's fair, right? But I mean, the Big 12 media poll, obviously we're going to vote, but this, based on it, some of these sports books, I wouldn't be shocked if they end up last or second to last in some of that.
Yeah. Well,
in terms of the preseason projection.
So that's the same thing. If Neil was still the coach and it was this exact roster, they'd be way worse. I think it would be a 3.5 or 4.5, and even though it's an easier schedule, right? Because that's
the thing too. You got at least one win with RMU. You probably, I mean, you certainly should win the game against Ohio, even though it's a good program and it's on the road. You mentioned Pitt 5.5. Well, it's in Morgantown. I think it's pretty reasonable to say they might be the Vegas favorite going into that game. So your first 3 games, you're going to be the Vegas odds favorite. The same sports books are saying you're only going to win 5.5 all year. So Cody, based on what, and I know they're just setting the tone in May and it's off money and they want the house to win and all of that you talked about. But in all reality, if you're being smart as an odds maker, and I'm not saying they're going to go ahead and win 8 or 9 games here, if you think they're going to win the first 3 games and go 3-0 or at least 2-1, you're predicting one hell of a horrible last month and a half that they're basically going to lose 5 in a row to end the year, or win 1 out of their final 5 or 6, or have it be Rich Rod maybe crawls in the AP poll because he does beat Pitt and starts 3-0, and then it's going to be a colossal, fall down the mountain. That's kind of what they have to be saying, that they're going to do really bad in conference play to only get a 5.5, or else they're going to certainly exceed it. And then the sports books are going to kind of have egg on their face, because a couple years ago, the sports books all lost money on West Virginia. They had a 4.5 preseason over under. They end up winning 9 in a bowl game. They, as I said, they probably should have won 10 or more based on blowing the Houston game and having bad loss in there, even blowing the game against Oklahoma State with the lead at one point. And no, I don't think one game the whole year were the sports books correct in terms of what they're projecting going in. I'd imagine they don't want to go down that road again. That's not good for Vegas, but it appears that if the fans are correct, if Rich Rod is correct, if even his assistant coaches are correct as being a better staff, that is the road we're going to go down again. That's basically the best case scenario, is to go down that same road, or it's going to be Vegas is right, and it's going to be a really bad year one, and then the fans have to decide how much rope they give Rich Rod that they did not want to give Neil Brown even early in his tenure.
Yeah. Well, and I just think it's and I talked about this a while ago, but
yeah,
there's this narrative that the Big 12 isn't good, right? And it's just not
down.
It's just not true. Like, there's really good football teams in the Big 12. And I do think when if just going on Vegas odds, let's say West Virginia does start 3-0. I think if a sports book looks at the conference schedule, it's like, well, there's obvious ones: Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, BYU, Iowa State. Like, we can't project them to beat any of those teams.
Sure.
Right. And then it's like you get into more, and I don't remember the football schedule off the top of my head perfectly.
Yeah, we went through it about a month or so ago, but 100%. Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know how many outright, just because you don't know anything about West Virginia, right? So how many outright games do you feel great about projecting them to win?
Yeah.
When you and I projected the schedule, I don't think there were I don't know if there were any conference games that we were like, hard WVU absolutely wins this game.
Yeah, I mean, we did the whole favorite, underdog, or swing. Yeah. There was a lot of swing games even for both of us. I do think we both and this was before the spring portal, so it was a different roster. We won't, we need to do it again almost. But I think we both did land on more of a 6.5, 7 win total if we were going to do the Vegas odds. We, at that point, a month or so ago, we were more in that 6.5, 7, which is a big difference from a 5.5 if you're talking about money and what you want people to bet on. But yeah, that's the point. But, Cody, I think what the fans also say, which is hard for Vegas to project, and this is why they get the win total at 5.5 and being so low. The way Rich Rod in West Virginia work, and this is no matter the roster, we've seen this over his career and certainly for the program. You just gave me 4 games that we guarantee, even if they beat Pitt and shellac them and it's a 3-0 start, we can almost guarantee the Texas Techs, those games, Arizona State, they're going to go in as the underdog. Mm-hmm. But I think, Cody, we both can agree Rich Rod's going to get one of them. Like, they're going to upset somebody. If you give him 4 hard games in a year, I think it's easy and safe to say he's winning 1 at least. Maybe he will win 2. Maybe not in year 1 with the roster, but we've seen upsets every season. There's going to be some surprise. He's going to beat somebody. And so that's already one of those that likely will be wrong. But it's also very possible that one of the games that you're sitting down when you're doing the over-under, they have them all in the same group of the UCFs of the world and Arizonas and Houston's, etc. I mean, maybe Rich Rod will go ahead and win one of those games that they're definitely supposed to lose, but then go ahead and lose to UCF, for example. So then that just cancels each other out. And they've owned UCF. They certainly did with Brown, but that's a whole new regime. That's going to be back in Orlando. So that kind of cancels that and moves that around. I do think if I was betting that a 5.5 win-loss, and certainly a 5 if you see Circa Sports, leads me to want to bet the over. I'm not saying they're going to win 10 games or win the Big 12, even though, of course, Arizona State did. They went because Rich Rod even brought this up to me again in Pittsburgh outside a bar, that Arizona State went from worst to first. I brought up Indiana. He said, I like Arizona State as an example even better. They went worst to first. No one thought they could do anything. They're in our conference, a similar schedule. They did it, and our track record at West Virginia over 100 years is way better than theirs. Why, if them, why not us? Like, he gave me that whole speech. Which, okay, I mean, all you say to Rich Rod is, that's valid. Like, that makes sense. But, I mean, it's hard to say off the roster. But they did do that. But I'm tempted to go over just for the fact that it is a legitimately easier start to the schedule. I mean, every year under Brown, except for that first year, you could go into the season saying, week 1, it's either swing or they're a heavy underdog like those Penn State games. And, of course, the rebirth of the Brawl was on the road in 22. You know, you're worried about Brown early on in the tenure and all the things they had to figure out there, the COVID year. You're going in, like, starting the season, there's a lot of excitement, but it's like, this very likely could be an 0-1 start. This year, it's going to be 1-0. Like, he could have a horrible day at the office coaching. The roster could be bad, and they're going to crawl through somehow and still beat RMU. That is an FCS program. Even Brown dominated them. Maybe you're worried for a quarter. They're going to win. Like, I put money there. So when you go through it and you're looking for wins, you might even feel that way about Ohio. If they played last year, when they won 10 games, it would be different, but they're doing a whole overhaul too, and that's with less money. Yeah, they're at home, but you figure that's 2. So not going to guarantee that as much as RMU, but you figure that's 2. Again, you're getting close to the 5 number already, so I'm tempted to want to go over on this win-loss. Doesn't mean they're going to win 9 or 10 games, but that's, I think, I don't know if everyone nationally or the sports books were looking at the schedule as much, that this is a little different than the last schedules under Brown, certainly last year. And you have a couple wins here that are guaranteed. With Brown, you only really had 1 a year with the FCS, which is exactly what Ren Baker has been saying, why he wants to do this schedule format aside from a neutral site rarity, like when they play Virginia next year with 10 Power 4s instead of 11, in his mind, to guarantee probably at least 2 wins in most years. And you only need 4 more, and you're getting into a bowl game, and you're over this win-loss. And you only need 3 more to push it if you're Circa Sports. 5.5 and 5 is way different. So it feels like, honestly, Cody, if you're a Mountaineer fan that's all mad about disrespect to Rich Rod or the program, go ahead and bet the over. Maybe you'll make some money like you did a couple years ago, because it seems right there for you. Now, I do want to also ask you, because, nobody can do anything about Vegas odds, and they're all out there. And I think I agree. I think you put it perfectly. I could see, if you're Rich Rodriguez, thinking, you know what, this is similar to what Brown got. This is disrespectful. I should get a win more. Zach Alley should get a win more than Jordan Leslie was getting. Like, you can feel disrespected as a staff. I get that. But it's fair because we don't know about the roster, and they're the ones not telling us anything. So this is just going to be the case. Where are you on Rich Rod? Because he put it out there, and we've both kind of said that, we want to evaluate seasons on what we deem as good or bad off of what the coaching staff says. And I don't even want to go to the wild projections of him saying they got to win a national championship during the tenure and Big 12 title, etc. But he went literal then, and this isn't to McAfee. This is to, just everybody. And then he even told me to my face, and certainly not as much of a pageantry event like when he's on the McAfee show, that not necessarily winning the conference, while that would be the goal, because then you get in the playoff, but that they have to be in the conversation in November. That was literally what he said. For year 1 to be quote unquote good. He knows the roster better than we know the roster. Do you think that is him putting his foot in his mouth? Will he regret those words? Is that a fair comment for the fans to take seriously from Rich Rod? Doesn't mean, it could involve blowing the season and losing 3 in a row at the end of the year and being out of the race. But is that reasonable, or is that then, as I said, putting his foot in his mouth that he's going to regret it, and the fans are going to start going into next year saying Rich Rod talked a lot of stuff and didn't live up to it?
Yeah, I think it's, Rich Rod he's such an interesting character, right? Because
Yeah.
he says all this, but then like I would bet internally, I would bet he wishes that they were projected lower, right? Because he can use that as more of a motivation. I bet
Probably
he
like
wish
this. Yeah.
I bet he wishes they were projected like 2.5 wins, so he can go to his players and be like, "Everybody thinks you suck, and what are you going to do about it?" Right? Because it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you're right. When he talks to people, he does talk about the what he wants to do, compete for Big 12, win a national championship, and all that. I
All the
don't
time
think
across the board.
I don't I don't think it's wrong for him to say that as a way to excite the fan base here in May. I do think, I think it would be a bit of a misstep to maybe go to the Big 12 media days and, be like, I guarantee we're going to be one of the three best teams. And, week 10, we'll be competing to go to Dallas. And it's like,
Right.
that's tough, right? That's tough. And then if we get into August and that's like, hey, the goal this year is to win the Big 12. Did
I
I say
think he
Big
might
10?
though. I don't think he.
But
I don't think he knows how to talk down and not be confident because they're
yeah,
going to ask him in Dallas. You are projected only five and a half. You're likely low projected in the Big 12 media poll. You do have the resume. You did it before. There's supposed to be more money there at West Virginia than there was even with Neil Brown. Do you feel slighted? What do you think? And I'm sure he's going to say, West Virginia is always the underdog. We like being slighted. We're going to use it as a rallying cry. But we got to win right away. We believe we can win right away. We're not trying to go in there and just have a fun year. We're trying to win right away. I imagine that's going to be the theme of what Rich Rod will say at Big 12 Media Day.
and I'm just thinking like, at that point when it gets out to all the media in the conference and it gets out to national media, now it creates a scenario where like, hey, I think in my personal opinion, I think if you get 4 or 5 conference wins and
Yeah.
win at least 2 of you out of conference, I think that's good year one. And I don't
Fair.
know. I would hope a large majority of the fan base would agree. Like, hey, that's a good year one, right? 6, 7 wins, go to a bowl game, do decent, do well in conference,
Win the bowl game.
500, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you can create it. He can create a scenario where if he talks so much, right, like we're gonna win the Big 12 or we're gonna play in the right, like those kinds of things, and it gets out into the national media, right? That creates this perception, and then that's when you would get into like, if they lose to Pitt and maybe it's a bad loss, now it's people are tweeting about it, and now if the game's on Fox, big talk from Rich Rod falls flat. That's how you get that kind of stuff where it starts to get negative when in reality
Yeah.
it's year one, and I don't want to say temper expectations, but like, I don't know, be realistic. But like I said, I bet internally Rich Rod wishes it was worse, and I would bet he hopes they get picked last in the media poll, and he
Yeah.
can and he him bringing Arizona State up to you. That's probably his dream, to go worst from first. I mean, that's probably even more than like probably not more than winning a national championship, but like in
Right.
his heart of hearts, I bet the number one thing he wants to do is be picked last and then win the conference.
Yeah, 100%. I also do think Cody kind of like dropped the seeds of this, that if they somehow would win national championship in year one, I think he might retire and not do the whole contract. Like he kept saying like, that's my dream, like to go
Yeah.
out that way. And I'm going to be like, go out that way. I got 5 years and you're saying you're going to continue year one. Yeah, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, WVU Sports Now, talking the national perception being very, very low, very, very down on WVU football, despite what Rich Rod has been saying. And yeah, maybe the national media is starting to get some steam and, click around social media and be like, yeah, okay, he's real confident. Yeah, I see this quote. Like, whoa, I'm looking at the roster. I've seen no coverage. Like, 5.5. Like I could go 3.5 or 4, and maybe he'd even prefer that. Yeah, in some respect. But he'll use this though. I think he's going to say like, okay, we got 5.5, but there's only 2 programs that got better than that aren't with us at the bottom, etc.
And it's we've kind of already seen what I was talking about, Mike. I used to joke that like Neil Brown would have to kill somebody to get on national news. And like how many times really did he have a national, like the one time with your comment about having fun, that was like a national story.
Yeah.
Other than that, Neil was
right.
so. But we've already
Well,
seen
before the
Rich Rod.
brawl, when he made that comment about like going into the brawl, and then when he made I think he was unfairly characterized, but when they made the comment to Narduzzi of, oh, this is a lot of fanfare for a big game, nationally started, that got some steam. Yeah, it was every time it was viral comments trying to make fun of him. Like it wasn't promoting the program like Rich Rod.
But we've already seen, because Rich Rod is a character, we've already seen the transfer thing was a national, right? All the national outlets picked up on, 20 transfers away, trouble in Morgantown, because Rich Rod's a character.
Yeah.
And that, so I think we've already seen where he, just by virtue of who he is, the program is going to have a bit of a spotlight on it. And we know people revel in despair. So if they lose the brawl, every national outlet's going to have something on it.
Yeah.
If they start slow in conference play, if Rich Rod starts
100%.
2-4, I'm sure every national outlet will throw something up on it and dig up his pre. So we're already kind of seeing it, in the trend. We talk about it. I won't go over. But the trend.
Well, no, this is more covered.
It was so
100%.
It was so
Rich Rod's
nothing.
More covered.
It was so nothing, and we still saw. I mean, basically all the national outlets throw something out there to try and get traffic on it. So when we get into the season, and it is just ripe for that kind of like point and laugh coverage, right? Like, look how bad they are, haha, right?
No, and that's going to happen. I do think that Rich Rod being there, and this might even been part of Ren Baker's mindset in hiring him, and obviously he believes Rich Rod can win, or else he wouldn't do it. Ren Baker wants to win as much as anybody, and his job and career is on the line too. But I do think part of what he was thinking is kind of what you're alluding to. Neil Brown had several years where he's sitting there every, week one is, we're the most underrated. This guy disrespected. Now we're underrated historically. Like Neil Brown just gave a vibe like, God, like someone give us something that isn't just me going viral. And then after he went viral, he did appear to be very, very defeated. And we're talking year 6 versus year 1 for a coach. But Rich Rod has done more interviews than anybody in the country. Literally speaking, I am comfortable saying that, including SEC coaches, championship coaches. I don't think anyone's talked more nationally, locally combined in general than Rich Rod. I do expect that to continue during the season, Cody. He's going to have a spot on McAfee, which is the most watched program in the country every freaking week. He's still gonna have his damn regular press conference. So he's going to get at minimum 2 in terms of press conference type coverage every week. Obviously, the McAfee thing might not be giving him hard questions, but he's still going to be on there. That's tons of exposure. And going into the brawl, because of everything that means, he's not even played Pitt since 07 at all himself, just at any program. That potentially could be game day. There are other games that may take it over, but at minimum, it's going to be some national situation. There's going to be tons of coverage there. They're going to harken back to 07 to the point that Mountaineer fans will get annoyed. And it's going to be all about that. And Cody, I think here's the positive end too, that Ren might be thinking, and, outside of the coverage, the exposure that Rich Rod's providing, a lot more exposure than Neil Brown could, kind of free exposure because you're paying him a salary, but not more for all this exposure. He actually is making less than Brown did. I think that could be all going into Ren's mind, that this is now going to be more of an exposed program. If that, there's a lot of fans, but now even more exposed, more attractive for a national game. I mean, Cody, hell, if they win a Big 12 title, Rich has joked about this too. I legitimately think that they will get a national movie made about this. The Rich Rod story from 07 to now may literally be a 30 for 30 once they get a cap end. And I pretty much know that the program has always not wanted to do that, and they've kind of been broached to it, and they do not want to cooperate for a 2007 30 for 30, and we get why. But if they end up with a Big 12 title or getting in the playoff or something, they might say, okay, go ahead and do it. We're going to end it on a positive note. Like, that all will happen, and that might be in Ren's mind. And the other part about it is that I think is a really real thing that will get in, make Neil Brown a little bitter, I'm sure, if this would occur. Cody, if you want to get in the nitty gritty, it is true in the 6-year stretch under Neil Brown, excuses or not, that it's the worst since before Nod Nalen with the WVU football program. All different eras, all different systems, etc. It's just factually, Neil Brown knows it too. He's an historian of the game. It's worse than anything West Virginia put up since the 70s. And even in the 70s decade, you had the Peach Bowl win. You had some with Bowden. Like, it's arguably the worst since before that. And they weren't ranked at all in the AP poll in any week. And in those 6 years, they got one coach's poll at the end of 2023 in the final ranking that nationally they don't even really get credit for, but they never got in the AP poll. And there were points, like I can point to the middle of 2023, certainly after that TCU win. I think they should have been ranked in the AP poll, even if like 24, 23. I think there were a couple points that you could argue they should have been ranked in the AP poll. You could even go back to early in the tenure after they got some ranked wins, even though those teams didn't finish ranked, like a Kansas State win at the time, Virginia Tech, where you could argue, okay, middle of that year, maybe they should have crawled in at a 24, 25, but they never got a benefit of the doubt. It almost was like nationally, the voters, everyone was saying, okay, Brown, like you had previous success, you're not winning now. You got to do more than the other guy to get ranked. Like you really got to do a lot. And that, I think he felt that and that really annoyed him. I think Rich Rod will get the benefit of the doubt. I think that if Rich Rod starts 3-0, even though Pitt's not a great program right now, there will be more voters that'll say, let's throw him a vote here. Or especially if he starts 3-0 and then gets a conference win and now he's 4-0 or 5-1, that type of start to the year. I think voters will start saying, we want Rich Rod in the national conversation. It's good for business. It's good for revenue. I think ESPN and the Paul Feinbaums of the world and the Pat McAfees of the world, obviously he has a vested interest, but people that, Pete Thamel, if you want to get real national, Stephen A. Smith, who's not obviously a big college football guy, but he's going to be brought up occasionally on First Take. I think they're going to start saying, okay, you get in the middle of the year, if West Virginia's winning, maybe Rich Rod gets on the show, or go ahead and give Rich Rod a 24th ranking because we want to get them in more spotlight games. He's a known coach. Those things would never have happened for Neil Brown at all. He wouldn't be an attractive commodity, nor would the program to be on that level of national coverage. I think Rich Rod could be. And I think that's part of in Ren's mind. Yeah. I think Rich Rod could do that. I think Rich Rod could be somebody that if there is a benefit of the doubt, even the high end, if West Virginia is getting close to that 17th or 18th ranking in a top 25 poll, I could see Pat McAfee, and this shouldn't be the reality, but I could see him nudging some, in the CFP. If you get Rich Rod in that CFP, I'll blow this coverage up, but I won't do it if it's not Rich Rod. And, it got to be on the field and fair, but I could see a tie-breaking scenario. Let's throw Rich Rod in. Those things would never happen for Neil Brown, but I think it could happen for Rich Rod. So I think he's playing with a little bit of house money that you have an easier schedule, and you're probably going to get the benefit of the doubt if you start winning, but you got to start winning is the key, and it is an unknown on the roster.
Yeah, and that's my example I always use is when you think about the Big 12 media poll, right? 2/3 of the guys, two-thirds of the guys who vote in that poll are in Texas and Oklahoma.
That's true.
And the teams they know the most about are the Texas teams and the Oklahoma team now.
Right.
And I've been beating this drum for a couple of years. When West Virginia got picked last in 2023, why did they get picked last? They just picked them last because they knew the least about it, right? So there's always going to be, and I don't feel bad saying this, there's always going to be in the Big 12 media because of geography, there's always going to be bias against West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF. And
they're always the ones picked at the end, by the way.
Because they're, right?
Yeah.
The Arizona schools have each other, the Utah schools have each other. But, the guys in Texas, which I don't fault them too much, they don't know that much about West Virginia or Cincinnati or Central Florida. Now, with Rich Rod, at least this year, it's a national story. I'm sure a lot of those guys have heard a lot about Rich Rod, and probably more than West Virginia than in any of the off seasons with Neil Brown. And that kind of that's the example I'm giving. That kind of plays into your part of just like eyeballs, right? People caring and the AP voters. Hey, I've heard about West Virginia all off season, and they're sitting here at 3-0 in their bye week. Maybe I'll vote them 25. And that
I think that's more likely now. Yeah,
that just wasn't in. I think West Virginia could/should have been ranked at the end of 23 in the preseason 24 poll, but who
Or
cares?
even at the end of 23, they got in the
they-
coaches poll, but not the
that's
AP poll. Not even put them in at the end of 23.
But
They
it's
had
'cause
9
it's
wins.
like-
They had teams with less wins that were in that poll.
'cause
So
it's-
I think
it's-
at the end of 23 they should have been there.
Well, because they won 9 games, but
Right.
were they a national story? Not really. Neil got a nice ESPN feature that offseason, but there wasn't, a lot of talk. Neil talked all that offseason about how they were being underrated, and right, so they weren't front of mind for AP voters, and they didn't get in that preseason poll. I had them in mind. They didn't get in that preseason, but like I said, people across the country have probably heard more about WVU football this offseason than probably since when Will Greer was here.
And the difference too is that season going into that preseason poll, it was for the most part easier to argue because you're bringing a lot more from a team that did win just 9 going into the 2024 preseason poll. This year, because I have a whole, I could do a debate. I think in this era now of the sport with a legit playoff, preseason polls probably should go away. Like, what are you evaluating? We've had 2 portal windows. It's not fair to do a preseason poll
Florida
at
State
all.
was a top 10 team last year.
Right. They should just be done. Like, in general, even the AP poll should not probably exist until week 7 at the earliest if you want to be truly fair of what's going on. And if you got to do it all year, fine, but not preseason. Yeah. But it's going to happen because people will always click, and even the AP wants those clicks now, even though it's the AP and should be above it all. Just my colleague Will Graves will tell you that they're moving into a territory that they want the clicks as much as other digital platforms, and maybe it's not as legit as it once was in that respect. If you look at fully what they're going away from, there's a conversation they might no longer do a game recap. So that'll tell you all you need to know there. So that's where everybody is, but you could probably get rid of those. But now, because of the portal and so much changing of the roster, West Virginia is just one of the more unknowns of any program in the country. So it could have been worse than 5.5, and certainly you just don't really know, because anyone, they could defend themselves, Cody. Anyone we're calling out here that said it was the greatest hire in the country, was an A+ hire, and had him, in top 25, top 30, top 40 lists after the winter portal for bringing in Power 4 transfers, they could then say, yeah, but a hell of a lot changed since I wrote that article. Now they lost half of those players, and I don't know the new players, and I'm just sick of this. It's different every week, so screw it. 5.5, it's negative now. Like, maybe they're all, they can't, they're not going to just evaluate somebody off of, a podcast that Rich Rod's doing. It almost is like he's trying to push that. Like, I'm doing a pod, so give me a win. That's not enough. Like, we don't have anything to evaluate. And I even asked him if I didn't throw it all up there, but you heard my full interview that we don't have video of. But I even asked him, like, hey, the portal window's done. Now can you give me a name? And he still didn't want to give me anything. Like, at that point, he was even like, I know it's coach speaking. Everybody wants a name, but like, I don't want to leave anybody out. And it's like, Rod, we're not leaving anybody out. We're giving something to put in. Like, at this point. So that's just the situation. But as you said, maybe he's even doing that on purpose. Maybe he's like, you know what? If I promote these players too much, we'll get bumped. I want everyone disrespected up in here. Like, maybe that's what he wants, from equipment manager to a starter to a coach to me. Maybe he likes, because people already see, like, oh, on the biggest additions, people are talking about coaches for other programs. West Virginia stole at Oklahoma's Power 4 D coordinator. Everyone sung the praises. Why doesn't that get brought up for West Virginia? He probably is, telling Zach, yeah, it's disrespectful. Get pissed. Like, he doesn't want. I don't want you to win a preseason award. If you recall, and this might be what a lot of fans, could bring up if they want to connect the dots. Going into a lot of Neil Brown seasons, the assistant coaches, some of the players in green, et cetera, will get disrespected and not put on lists. But a lot of the assistant coaches were always on these, 30 under 30, top 25, gonna get hired, all these things. And then you go into the year and those position groups just would not be good. And the coach and the fans would start like, Brown, you said this was going to be better. You said this is disrespected. You said you're Jordan Leslie and the defense is getting disrespected, and now it's the worst in the country. What the hell? You're lying to us. You just don't know what you're talking about. That's what they all would say. So now everyone's just the hell disrespected. Everyone's disrespected. Just across the board. Everyone, equipment manager is the worst in the country. The D coordinator is overrated. Rich Rod can't do it anymore. Nobody knows who the starter is. Rich Rod probably loves it. The whole hour speech might be, everyone in this room, everyone nationally thinks you're trash. Like, he might like that. And this might be the year he can do it. Because if he goes ahead and has a Kirk Cincinnati year, going into year 2, they're going to be that sexy dark horse playoff team, or go ahead and have a run, Big 12, etc. Or maybe even if he wins 7-8 games in year 1, if he really shows the doubter and proves them wrong. But this is now the year that he can fully say, disrespected, we got to do something with it. And I think Neil Brown kind of even used it to his advantage going into 23. And then, of course, it annoyed him that he didn't get the respect from 23 going into 24, and it was so bad. But this is going into year 1. So I think Rich Rod can use it to his advantage right now. And again, it could be worse, but I do think if you look at the schedule and you look at the home games and you look at who they're playing, he should get over 5. He should get a bowl game out of this year. And I guess last point on this, Cody, I don't know where you are, forgetting Vegas and what everyone's saying nationally, who do not legitimately know as much about the program as even us, let alone Rich Rod, because they've proven not to know as much based on the reporting so far. I think a fair thing for the fans is to expect a bowl game, and maybe it'll be a year where you even get a lot of players to buy into the bowl game because they're proving people wrong, and it's year 1, and a lot of them are young and have eligibility left. Maybe they want to stay. Maybe Rich Rod would think more of them if they do. It's hard to evaluate bowl games. But this, I think it's fair to at least expect that. I do think, even though it's year 1 and you want to give some time, and not everyone is going to do the Kirk Cincinnati thing, even though you have the transfer portal and you can use it to your advantage as much as it can hurt you. I do think if Rich Rod turns around and has a 3 or 4 win year like he did in 2001, that I know in the offseason he'll say, year 1, we had to do an overhaul. My bad. We'll figure it out. I'm a good coach. That's what Ren Baker will say too. I think it's fair to be mad about that, though. I think it'd be then fair, because as much as 6, 7 wins is more realistic and 10 wins is unfair, I think if he has a 4-win year and Rich Rod and Ren Baker, because we all know Rich Rod's not getting fired after year 1, even if they go 1-11. But I think it's fair, Cody, in the end of the season press conference, when Ren Baker's sitting there, because he'll give us one, if they have a 3-win year and he says it's year 1, give Rich Rod some time, I knew it would be an overhaul thing, I think it's fair to come back, Ren, and say, you and Rich were talking a lot going into the year about being disrespected. Rich said a lot of things about what the goal was, about what's a good year. You literally said that you can't have a bad year you just got to figure it out. It can't happen. Now it has. I think it's fair for the fans to be mad about that and wonder, what the hell was being sold to them? Was that maybe overestimating yourselves, and now you have foot in your mouth? I do think it'd be fair for the fans to get mad a little bit if that is the tone of a really horrendous season. I want to put that out there too. If we're sitting here next January and Ren saying, forget 2025, it's a blip on the radar, Rich Rod's a great coach, I think it's fair to say, he said he had to win the Big 12 in year 1, and it's 3 wins. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, it's I think people are really good. Media and fans are really good now at recognizing just coach speak that's meaningless, and
right.
You just ignore it. I do. There is a level to which you have to take what coaches say seriously. And as far back as this hire, Mike, you and I have been talking about, Rich Rod's got to set the bar. He's got to set expectations, right? He's set them very high. And I'm sure there's a lot of fans and a lot in the media that are like, that is just coach speak, because you can't come in and
sure
ask for patience, and especially that. But he said it, right? And I think you're right. That's the bar he set, the program set, Ren Baker set. We as the media now, it's our responsibility to hold them to that if they don't reach in, and especially if they don't come close to it.
I think it's holding accountability, 100%.
Yeah,
holding
absolutely.
Accountable.
And that's there's a lot that coaches say. Every press conference they do, it's just throw it out like nothing, right? Meaningless. And like I said, I think people are really good at seeing that now. Stuff like, we're going to compete for the Big 12 right away, right? That can't just be meaningless. You can't just turn around. You can't just turn around and say, well, it was year 1. It's like, well, yeah, it was year 1 when you set the bar. What, So I do agree with you on that one there, Mike.
Yeah, and I also think too that there are, and I'm sure you've seen this, there are a lot of fans that even though they're being realistic and they probably don't really believe they're going to go ahead and win the Big 12 title in year one, they also do like that Rich Rod
Yeah.
is so confident, even though it's an
Mhm.
easier schedule, even in week one. This is more what Ren Baker wants. You're playing the FCS, etc. I'm sure if Ren Baker sat Rich Rod down and be like, "Do you want to play Bama?" He'd be like, "Yeah, sign me up." Like Rich Rod is just very confident. He wants to play anybody, beat anybody. Whereas that's a separation from Neil Brown, who was always trying to walk the line of, and he got real confident last year, which is what sunk him, I think, because fans threw it back in his face. But prior to that, he always would try to walk the line of, "Yeah, I'm confident. We're going to win. We're going to be better than expectations because they're really low." But he never once, I don't think one time in 6 years did he say the words national championship,
Mhm.
nor even Big 12 title until the last year in 24. Then they started saying we got to compete for a Big 12 title, the coaches and players. I don't know if he actually even said that literally. Like he was really making it clear what the expectations were. He even made comments, and a lot more of this was towards the end or after he got hired, that 8 wins to him was a good year. Whereas Rich Rod's saying, I got to compete for a Big 12 title. 8 wins is not winning a Big 12. So Rich Rod is putting the bar even higher than that. I mean, there were some fans that were kind of down on that vibe because they were like, Neil, I get maybe you're being realistic, but going into a year and in the summer to hear that we're basically trying for 8 wins is not really getting me thrilled about the fall. Like I'm not running through a wall to go ahead and play in the Mayo Bowl if that's where you believe the ceiling is. And he was even asked directly by Hoppy, do you think there's a ceiling here now, even if there wasn't before? And Neil Brown kind of danced around it. It almost comes across and kind of talking to him. He does think there is one. Rich Rod does not. I mean, Rich Rod clearly is saying, I don't think there's a ceiling. The ceiling is the limit. And maybe that was attractive to Ren Baker as well. But year one is different than year 6, but you could argue that Rich is putting even more pressure on himself, because imagine this scenario, Cody. If he goes out there the first 3 years and it's 6 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins, that's good. For Neil
Mhm.
Brown, that would have been fine. But I think even in that scenario, fans would come back and say, year one, you said if you don't finish the contract, Big 12 contender, you got to be a national contender, that, you want to be winning these conference titles, etc. 8 wins isn't enough. We're now 3 years in and 8 wins is the ceiling. Like that feels like Neil Brown. Like, so the fans are expecting this 5-year period to be more than the Neil Brown 6-year stretch. So it cannot be similar. And I also think that, and we've talked about this too, as much as it even seems like Pat McAfee himself is kind of trying to realize, oh, we got a little too crazy. And now if you hear him occasionally, might take a minute in year one. He always pauses even that. Like, oh, we know he does this with his hand. Like it might take a minute in year one, and then we're going to do this. I think the genie's out of the bottle. I think there's a little bit of a sense of maybe the effort was put in to kind of try to calm that down, that the fans are going to expect a national title in year one. But the problem is Pat McAfee says, oh, give him a year. And then Rich Rod the next day says, we got to contend for a Big 12 title in year one. If you do that, you get in the playoff. That doesn't go hand in hand. And the fans heard him. The December 20th intro presser, Cody, was covered nationally. Even the presser was on freaking the McAfee show that was watched by millions. People hear it. I mean, I think we've talked about this all the time, and sometimes the detriment, sometimes the annoyance of media. The West Virginia fan can get irrational and get, illogical and can get crazy at times for sure, but they remember what is freaking said to them. And I think they're going to remember every word of that December 20th presser if they end up with a 3-win year, and you're going to see all that thrown, even including to McAfee. So, and also, Rich Rod has the example of Arizona State going from worst to first, and then even Kirk Cinetti, that we talked about this with basketball and Ross Hodge, that, normally you want to give a year, but he now has to worry about DeVries doing a 10-win turnaround in year one to put on him. I think if Rich Rod has a really bad year and he came from a group of 5, that the fans can say, well, Kirk Cinetti came from a group of 5 and won in year one. Why can't you? You're supposed to be a better coach than him. So like that can work, against you as well. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, WVU Sports Now, Mountaineer Report. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts. And of course, here on YouTube, as we talk the evaluation, the low expectations around the football program here in the spring, not even at the summer yet, going into year one for Rich Rod. but I do want to give some time now briefly. The baseball program could be accused here of choking this season away. And we did a show, I think 2 or 3 shows ago, which you can still find everywhere you get your podcasts, on if this is going to be the greatest season in program history, even better than a super regional appearance, even better than a shared conference title, even better than when they did host a regional years ago. And there have been good years, even though there haven't been, that fully breakthrough year in the national scene. And they, right now, as we're speaking, they have a tie for the program single season wins record. They already have it if you're just talking regular season wins, but they need one more, including the postseason, to get the most wins ever in a full calendar year for the WVU baseball program. That's going to happen. They're going to win one more game at some point. They're likely going to win the Big 12 again. Likely it should be outright, but if this turns out where they get swept in that final series and they don't even win the Big 12, even if they're, still playing in the national tournament, which will be the case right now, they're still ranked in the top 25. How much of a balloon gets popped on this year? What does that do to Sabins and company going into next year? How much pressure is now on them to avoid that? Because, you kind of poo-pooed the reality of that happening again, but we're now stepping right into it where it could, and I think this would be even worse than 2 years ago, because that at least was a share of a conference title based on the math, because you're going off win percentage here. They wouldn't even get that, to not even get any trophy out of this year with how great it's been with a wins record. I think it'd be devastating, even though you want to be fair to Sabins in year one.
Yeah, and I think as long as the math you and I have done is right, we think their magic number to win the conference is just 1 now. In the last series against Kansas is here in Morgantown,
right?
This weekend, the same weekend as graduation. If they don't win the conference this weekend, I mean, it's unmitigated. I don't want to say one of the worst things, because I think we just had all the DeVries stuff, but it's
aside
horrendous.
from drama just on the field, aside from drama, that was awful.
That's a good marker. Just in terms of on the field results, the next worst one would be the walk-off grand slam the last time they hosted a regional. I mean,
but at least they're hosting a regional. This clearly wouldn't even get there. Yeah.
So
for baseball,
it's very simple, right? And you don't want to overreact. They lost the series at Kansas State, right? And you don't want to overreact when a baseball team loses one series. But as West Virginia fans, they are gun shy about disappointment.
Especially when it happened 2 years ago. This just happened.
So there is, I'm sure, a lot of people worried right now, or not even worried, just fully convinced, they're going to get swept and they'll lose the conference.
Can you imagine going to Sunday if they lose those first 2 games? Do you think the crowd will even show up?
That would be. I think the crowd.
The attendance numbers have been through the roof, but the fans might be like, "We're not coming to this. We're going to send you a message. This is bad."
I think it would sell out. I think it would be the strangest, the most anxious, tense crowd you could ever be in.
You might not even want fans there, because could you imagine they lose that? The fans might start throwing things.
Gosh. But
Cody's not going to leave his house. You're not leaving the house at that point.
Oh, hey, there's this big baseball series and graduation this weekend. I'm not leaving my house anyway. So
but you don't really live near the baseball stadium. But yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But no, so I might be naive. I might be the biggest sucker on the planet. But I still sit here as someone who's watched this team all year, and I'm like, do I feel good about them winning a single game this weekend? Yeah, I feel great about it.
Where do you feel about them winning 2 and winning the series at least? Because there are some people that say that likely hosting is out of play now. However, D1 kept them in the top 16, which is the poll that really is the top poll. They're ranked in every single major poll, and if they would win the series, certainly if they would sweep Kansas, that is back in play. Because nationally, they don't really evaluate as much those midweek games, even though they recently have been losses, and it's part of the overall record and all of that. It's been proven that they really are exhibitions. So if they would sweep Kansas, or certainly even win the series, back in play. So where is your confidence level on them doing more than just the one win for the conference title, which was locked up really weeks ago, and actually getting back in play to where national they can say, okay, everyone goes through a bad week and a half. They're back in as a legit top 15 team in the country. Obviously, even if they win the one game and don't win the series, that would be done and they would probably barely stay ranked. But where are you that they can stay ranked? They can potentially get in a conversation, even in a meeting for hosting by what they do against Kansas.
Yeah, it's a harder question than I'm sure you intend, Mike, because I love baseball and I've watched this team all year, and I
As
can
do
very
I.
confidently
Yep.
say this is a great baseball team, right? Like this,
Yes.
like all things relative, this is one of the best baseball teams I've ever watched play over the course of the season.
Yeah.
Now most of the teams I've watched are the Pirates, so.
Well, I mean, I think like if you want to evaluate baseball pitching wise, which we've seen blow up recently, certainly the bullpen is where you would say that's the problem outside of the West Virginia curse. Like they do not have a solid. They only have a couple solid starters. They have no bullpen. I would also caution Sabins. You better not hold anybody back for a damn regional. You need to be throwing who you need to be throwing and get these wins this weekend, because that's been accused of him in the midweek games at least.
So the part of my brain that is a baseball fan that's watched this team that is logical says this is a great baseball team. You should feel good about them winning every series. And then there's the part of my brain that acknowledges that there is West Virginia curse black magic. And I'm like, well, the most likely West Virginia thing to happen would to be get swept, go winless in the Big 12 tournament, and then you don't host. And so when you ask me that question, that's those two parts of my brain have to go to war, and I don't know.
Yeah, because you know what, and what the annoying part about that is, and that's very, very reasonable to feel, and that's how I'm sure that's how the fans feel right now. The annoying thing is, and it has to be, I know it is for the programs, but certainly, even covering this, whenever there's like a contingent of the fan base that would, it almost is like if they're told your two options are you choke at the end of the year, or you're just bad all year and you have no chance, they would rather just be bad all year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there are programs that are bad in a lot of these sports that they don't get made fun of on social media at all because they're not relevant at the end of the year. West Virginia gets relevant, and then they have this disaster that becomes a national story that, oh, they're doing it again. And the other end of it is you have people now saying the West Virginia baseball program is just one that can never win a quote-unquote big game. That is just complete slanderish. They've been in regionals. They won they got into a super regional. You have to win big games to get in a super regional. They have shared a conference title. That is not something that equates to not winning big games. You just won as many big games as Texas Tech that year. It's not like they get more of it than you, even though the fans seemingly don't want it. There have been big wins. They beat Marshall for 6 years straight, even though they eventually lost a game. Like they have won big games. They won rivalry games. The games at PNC Park when the backyard brawl, I covered them all. West Virginia destroyed Pitt in almost all of those. Mm-hmm. They lost one game recently in Pittsburgh that nobody really was watching, but the games at PNC Park, they were big games. They won a lot of those, and they were clearly the better program in those games. They've won big games, but the fan base remembers the last game. And if you blow it at the end in the last year that's most at top of their mind, they give you no credit for the past. So the reason why I even bring Sabins up, this wouldn't be fair to him at all. Unlike Rich Rod, who's been coaching for 40 years, this would not be fair to Sabins to evaluate his whole career off of his first year that has set a single season record. However, the fanfare's there. He certainly, captivated the fan base. There's the attendance numbers are there. Ren Baker opened up his tenure saying he had to be sold on going with him because he wanted to, do a national search. But Sabins has fully worked out so far in all reality, even no matter how they finish, it's better than what anybody thought going into year one in all reality. I mean, if anyone would have told you you're going to be in this spot in year one of a new coach, everyone would take it. And people thought they'd be worse this year than what they've been. But if they go ahead and get swept and collapse and don't even get a share of a conference title, I do think that a decent amount of the fan base will not only turn on the program, say they've done nothing, even though it's not true. They will turn on Sabins. And then you will go into year two with starting to get that Neil Brown pressure that, we better get some trophy real soon because we screwed up the one already. And now imagine, Cody, if you're sitting there going into year three, for example, and there's no Big 12 title, even if they win 40 games a year, and now people are going to start saying, top 10 program, Ren should have did national search. That's a Neil Brown hire all over again. He's young and inexperienced. We had a top 10 program and we didn't do a national search. That's all going to be talked about. The way to avoid it is simply performing in this Kansas series. I don't think any fan is requiring to win a national championship or even win a tournament or even go to Super Regional again. If he gets a outright Big 12 title with a wins record, even with 2 weeks of bad baseball, and says win 2 out of 3 against Kansas, not even win them all, I think the fan base will get off Sabins' back and not do the Neil Brown thing. If he gets swept, it's going to be rough. Like and it's not fair. It is year one. I think he's a good guy and a good coach, but the whole everything could be a whole 180 from where it was 2 weeks ago because of how bad these 2 weeks have been. And it shouldn't happen when you look at this team, especially being at home. Mm-hmm. They're going to get the bottom of the ninth. Like they can recoup. They're not going to be the team who has that happen to them. They can do it to somebody else. But this is not a small deal. This series should be nothing. This should be nothing. Ren Baker even kind of joked about it on Friday in Pittsburgh at the coaches caravan that, he made the flippant comment that's not, I think he put his foot in his mouth. Like, we're probably wrapping it up as we speak now. We don't have to worry about Kansas. No, Ren, like this is a gigantic deal now. Like I imagine he's sweating a little bit if they lose Friday.
Yeah. And it's, there's even scenarios where like, I don't know. Obviously, if you win a regional, no matter what happens this weekend, probably gets forgiven and gets like. But
sure, probably.
The path of least resistance is just, hey, win this series, right? Win this series.
I don't even think I don't think you got to even win a regional. If you win this series and get the trophy, I think everything will be at least forgiven for the last 2 weeks, and then you go on and have fun.
Not even forgiven per se. It'll just be utterly forgotten. Like, win the Big 12, go do whatever in the Big 12 tournament, host a regional, sell a trillion tickets, right?
Right.
People aren't going to be like, oh, but remember those 2 weeks when we thought they were bad?
Right.
So, but this is what I was going to talk. Is like, if we were logical people, we would just be like, yeah, just win the series.
You tried to do that last show, and you couldn't even entertain the reality of them losing the series to Kansas State because it was like those midweek games don't matter. They're way better than everybody else. If they even would have just won that series, even if they didn't sweep them, they just would have won that series. I think this wouldn't have the pressure on this series.
Yeah, it'd be locked up.
It'd be locked up, and then you could have freaking rested. I mean, this is part of them. They did this to themselves. I don't want to hear a press conference at the end of getting swept or Saban just saying, "Oh, I held back this starter. I didn't start him in this game because we wanted to worry about a regional because we know we're going to be in the postseason regardless. And yeah, winning a Big 12 would be great, but it's not the end all be all for us." I think the clear comeback would be, if you know what you could have done where you could have rested those players and still had the trophy, not sucked for 2 weeks prior. Like you put yourself in this situation, you need to realize by far the most important series of the season to date, 100%. Like you at minimum got to win the series. At minimum, certainly got to win one game. Like I even think as much as fans will never forget it and it'll be annoying to them, if you lose the series but win one game and win the Big 12 title outright, I think fans will at least say, okay, it's not the West Virginia curse thing. We have a trophy. It sucks, but like I'm going to celebrate this. And then we go to the regional. You get swept. It cannot happen. I mean, it's one of those things where Rich Rod's saying, I can't go 3-8. We just got to figure it out. You got to figure it out. You got to do hidden ball trick or whatever been going on. Like they won some games like that this year. Break it all out. Hidden ball trick. Whatever you got to do. I'd have a different starter every other batter if you got to. Kill the bullpen, like run it out and ruin your chances in the Big 12 tournament. This is the one thing that I never would advocate for not trying in the Big 12 tournament like they've done in the past. This is that series this is the most important. Do not worry about the Big 12 tournament. They got to win this series. If that means they have literally no one available in the Big 12 tournament, you are better off not even showing up and literally forfeiting the game if you win this series. They have to take this home because it's hard to win a Big 12 title, but it's a very good conference in baseball. When you have the lead they had, you got to have it. And as much as, natural disaster maybe could be brought up for some fans who really want to be optimists if they end up losing it by one game and say, oh, we lost that, those games at Oklahoma State, that's not fair. It should at least be a share. No one's going to want to hear that with how bad the last 2 weeks have been. Like, no one's going to want to hear that. It's literally been, so what? They won one out of their last 4 or 5, 1-4, something like that. So they lost.
Yeah,
last week they were 1-3. Last week they were 1-3.
It'd be 1-5.
And then the week before they lost the midweek game, and then just that can't happen. It cannot happen. I think they're going to at least win one. A lot to play for Kansas as well now, obviously, but even more. And it is at home, so maybe that's better. I mean, being on the road has kind of also been a problem for them. If you had to predict, I guess, last thing, if you had to predict, as long as they take care of business in this, do you think there's a realistic possibility, or what has to happen for a realistic possibility to still host a regional? Because there are some polls that are taking them totally out of the picture. D1 has them hanging on for dear freaking life, which is hilarious to me now, Cody. I don't know if you've seen this, but the entire year when D1 would not rank them, Mountaineer fans would say, well, we're still ranked. Every other national poll says we're ranked. We're claiming a ranking, all about rankings. D1's no bigger than Baseball America. Now the D1 has them 16th and everybody else has them beyond that. I already am getting Mountaineer fans say, well, D1's the most important one. That's all we care about. We don't even care about the other ones. It's like, what the hell? I mean, I have a screenshot of your comment 2 months ago. But what needs to occur for hosting a regional to be in play? Because as much as winning a Big 12 and winning one game would probably get the decline forgiven a little, if that hosting was really, really likely for a while, if they can at least accomplish that, even if they don't win, even if they lose the regional at home, I think that would fully forgive the slide. But that's the least likely probably overall, even if they would win the series. That's not a guarantee. Where are you on what they need to do, though, to host?
Yeah, obviously win this series against Kansas. And then in the Big 12 tournament, like, obviously you have to at least make the semifinal, because they're going to be a top 4 seed no matter what, so they get the bye.
Right.
So you've got to win your first game, because that puts you in the semifinal. And I don't know, like, probably to feel really good about it, probably at least make the tournament championship game. Because at that point, you'd feel pretty good, and it's like, I don't know who would steal it at that point. Steal it. I don't know who would leapfrog them at that point, if it's Arizona State or Kansas, I guess maybe. But like, obviously win this series, and then I think you have to have a good showing in the tournament. And I guess it's maybe up to discretion what a good showing is, whether that's just making the semifinal or making the championship game. And obviously, winning the tournament is that.
Yeah. I mean, that would. That would even be more important than winning the regular season title. If you win the tournament, I think that would be a more important trophy to have. So that would definitely forgive things. But that seems like that didn't even happen in the special years. I mean, that's hard to do.
Yeah, there's just. They've just put themselves in a place now where there's no room if you want to host, which obviously you do. But if you want to host, there's no room now for any slip up.
Right.
Like, even like you could probably even make the argument, like, even losing one of these games to Kansas would be bad.
I think it might eliminate you from hosting if you lose one of those games, unless you're in the Big 12 championship game in the tournament, maybe.
So that's just the position they've put themselves in, unfortunately. But again, I go back to it, like, my brain is like, this is a really good team. it's not a Herculean task for them to sweep Kansas and have a nice tournament and host. But that's, because of the Kansas State series, because of the midweek losses, that's just where they find themselves now, where you've almost got to play perfect baseball, to get the regional back here in Morgantown.
Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, and what I will close with, and this is the same thing, kind of where we got to hold coaches accountable, and I don't want to hear certain things at the end of years based on what they said going into the year. If you remember, and this wasn't Sabins directly, this Maisie did talk about, the next step is hosting again. He did kind of say that, literally speaking. And it's even been said by Ren Baker that, not only for women's basketball, which Mark Kellogg's talked about, but even for the baseball program, certainly, which seems even more realistic to be a possibility and has happened before, that, if we can host these things, the fan base is going to really show up and show out. We're going to do it big, and we're really good at home. And that's how you open up the floodgates to really make a national run. These postseason that allow the opportunity to host, women's basketball has been on the road. They don't get the whistle. We've been on the road talking about baseball. Don't get the calls, for example, or the strike zone. You cannot, and I do not want to hear, if they end up losing this series, or really in any way not hosting, no matter what from here on out. I don't want to hear Ren bringing up baseball with, oh, if we could only host, we'd do this, this, and this. Or we lost this call, we didn't get this strike zone on the road or wherever we are. Because the comeback will then be, Ren, Steve, you guys basically had hosting right to you and screwed it up. Whoever's home is going to get the strike zone. Whoever's home is going to get the whistle in women's basketball. It's not fair. That's reality. If you're home, you're probably going to get it. So be home. And it's hard in certain sports. You're dealing with voting, etc. But in this particular sport, you had it sewn up. You pretty much had it. And then you choked it away. And even if you still win the Big 12, you're not ending the year telling me, oh, we got to, if we would have hosted, we probably would have won one more game because the strike zone was bad. That is not going to be, I don't want that in a press conference. That was fine to say last year in the Super Regional when you're like, we play with house money. We won a regional. We did this, this, and this. We had the greatest year in program history. North Carolina's an elite program. Oh, the strike zone was so bad. They had a great individual player. JJ wasn't 100%. What if? Or even to do that in women's basketball, we talked about a lot too after the NCAA tournament run. Yeah, Sweet 16 is now the bar, but didn't get the whistle against Caitlin Clark. Even nationally, Kevin Durant was talking about it even 2 years ago. Nobody gets the whistle against her. She was destined to be there. And then this past year, still a great program that you're playing. They had some hiccups, but they really had a great year overall. It's not necessarily their fault they didn't host. That would not be in play for this baseball season if they do not end up hosting, because they would not be hosting because of their own fault. So I'm keeping a list here mentally. I got a lot of things that I do not want to be hearing from Ren Baker or any of these coaches in the next few months, depending on what goes on with these sports, that I think things have changed and what they can say. But as you're saying, and as we've talked about, this is a very good team. This is a very, very good team. It's not been messed up yet as we're speaking. There's still a lot in front of them, and it would not be unheard of, nor should be a national shock if they would sweep Kansas and go ahead and win a tournament game and end up hosting a regional and end up being an outright Big 12 champion, end up winning that regional, end up in the super regional again, and then win a super regional. It wouldn't be like that. Is just insanity, because that is how good this team is. It's hard to fully put any money down on Vegas that you're going to see that happening based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks. But that could very well happen and would totally forgive a rough 2-week stretch. But anything but winning the series against Kansas is that first step. You got to win the series against Kansas. Losing that series, certainly getting swept by Kansas would, I would hate to say this, but again, I don't think the fanfare that they would want on the national level and around Sabins would continue on. I think a lot of people would turn on them if they really putter this away. This is very, very important to not only the present, but the future of the program to at minimum get one game, but ideally win the series. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti again, Mountaineer Report, available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube, and all of our coverage of all of Mountaineer athletics is available, of course, on the site at WV Sports Now.